Welcome to Heredity, Lesson 4, Part 2. We are in Science Fusion, Cells and Heredity, page 126. It's in your genes. How are traits inherited? Mendel's experiments and conclusions have been the basis for much of scientific thought about heredity. His ideas can be further explained by our modern understanding of the genetic material DNA. What Mendel called factors are actually segments of DNA known as genes.
Dr. Lieber, DNA, genes?
Yes, genes. Genes are passed from parents to offspring. Genes are segments of DNA found in chromosomes that give instructions for producing a certain characteristic. Humans, like many other organisms, inherit their genes from their parents. Each parent gives one set of genes to the offspring. The offspring then has two versions or forms of the same gene for every characteristic, one version from each parent. The different versions of a gene are known as alleles. Genes are often represented by letter symbols. Dominant alleles are shown with a capital letter, and recessive alleles are shown with a lowercase version of the same letter. An organism with two dominant and two recessive alleles is said to be homozygous for that gene. An organism that has one dominant and one recessive allele is called heterozygous. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. In humans, cells contain pairs of chromosomes. One chromosome of each pair comes from each of two parents. Each chromosome contains sites where specific genes are located. As we see in the graphic, a gene occupies a specific location on both chromosomes in a pair. Alleles are alternate forms of the same gene.
This is amazing information. Students, I suggest you take time to study the graphic and understand it. I know I must contemplate this deeply.
Yeah, this would be a good time to press pause. How are chromosomes, genes, and alleles related to each other?
Aha! I see that alleles are a form of a gene, such as a form of a color gene that passes on brown eyes. And genes are found on chromosomes.
Yes, and it's important to realize that genes are segments of DNA in the chromosomes. You're going to love this, Gregor. This is a picture of actual chromosomes.
Oh my God, beautiful.
Yes, the genes, what you called Mendel's factors, are segments of DNA located on the chromosomes. We can see the location of a particular gene by tagging chromosomes with a fluorescent dye that highlights that gene. For example, those 4 yellow dots mark a specific gene on a pair of homologous human chromosomes. I noticed the word homologous has the word homo, meaning same. This is a pair of chromosomes that are the same length, the same position, and they have the same genes for the same characteristics. One homologous chromosome is inherited from the organism's father, the other from the mother. Gregor proposed the existence of hereditary factors in 1860. It was an abstract concept because nobody had identified cell structures and identified that they could house these imaginary units. And most biologists were skeptical about his proposed laws of inheritance.
Oh, yeah.
Before we turn the page, consider the alleles at the bottom of these two chromosomes. Before we turn the page, consider the alleles, the H's, at the bottom of these two chromosomes. Since alleles are alternate forms of the same gene, let's pretend that these would determine eye color. So let's say the alternate forms are blue eyes and brown eyes. The recessive is the lowercase h, which would be blue eyes. The capital H would be brown eyes, which are a dominant gene. Page 127, how genes influence traits. Okay, we see one girl with dimples and other girls that do not have dimples. The girls in this photo have different types of hair. Is hair a genotype or a phenotype? The alternate forms of genes, called alleles, determine the traits of all living organisms. This combination of alleles that you inherited from your parents is your genotype. The name genotype makes sense since it's in your genes. Your observable traits make up your phenotype. The phenotypes of some traits follow patterns similar to the ones that Mendel discovered in pea plants. That is, some traits are dominant over others. For example, consider the gene responsible for producing dimples, or those cute little creases in cheeks. This gene comes in two alleles, one for dimples and one for no dimples. If you have even one copy of the allele for dimples, you will have dimples. This happens because the allele for producing dimples is dominant. The dominant allele contributes to the phenotype if one or two copies are present in the genotype. The no dimples allele is recessive. The recessive allele contributes to the phenotype only when two copies of it are present. If one chromosome in the pair contains a dominant allele and the other contains a recessive allele, the phenotype will be determined by the dominant allele. If you do not have dimples, it is because you inherited two no dimples alleles, one from each parent. This characteristic shows complete dominance because one trait is completely dominant over another. However, not all characteristics follow this pattern. Active reading. Identify. What is the phenotype of an individual with one allele for dimples and one allele for no dimples? Okay, here's your homework. Imagine. Write a short story about a world in which you could change your DNA and your traits. What would be the advantages? What would be the disadvantages? Hey, catch you next time. Take care.